This case stands among the most chilling stories ever connected to an execution in the United States. Today, I'm going to walk you through the life of a man whose final act was the brutal murder of his two innocent daughters. John David Battaglia didn't just take their lives. He carried out the crime with a level of coldness that stunned the nation. He showed no remorse, no hesitation, and even used his final moments to mock those he had already destroyed. But before that execution chamber door opened for him, we need to return to where his path of violence began. John David Battaglia's story begins long before the tragedy that would etch his name into the darkest chapters of Texas criminal history. His early life, though constantly shifting from one military base to another, appeared stable from the outside. Born on August 2, 1955, in Enterprise, Alabama, he lived the life of a military child, moving frequently, adjusting to new schools, new friends, and new expectations. To neighbors and relatives, he seemed like a bright young boy who adapted well to every change. But constant displacement shaped him quietly, teaching him how to present the version of himself that fit each environment. This habit would later become a weapon. After spending time in Oregon during his teenage years, Battaglia graduated from high school and moved to Dumont, New Jersey. There, he blended into the community easily. He went to Fairleigh Dickinson University with the intention of building a career. But beneath the studious exterior, there were cracks forming. He began associating with the wrong crowd, experimenting with drugs, and drifting into behavior that frightened his father. It was his father who eventually pushed him toward the Marines, hoping the discipline would steady him. The military did straighten out parts of his life. He rose quickly through the ranks, eventually becoming a sergeant. Those who served alongside him described him as disciplined, confident, and charismatic. But his success seemed to magnify a long-hidden arrogance. Despite the promising military trajectory, Battaglia felt unsatisfied. He left the Marines, returning once again to school, this time hoping to reconnect with a sense of purpose. His path eventually led him to Dallas, Texas, where he decided to become a certified public accountant. He took night classes, worked relentlessly, and built a respected reputation. In Dallas, he was seen as charming, well-mannered, and socially pleasant. Many admired his intelligence. And it was there that he met Michelle, a well-known city attorney. Their romance unfolded quickly. By 1985, they were married, and soon after, they welcomed their daughter, Christy. From a distance, the family appeared perfect. Friends described Battaglia as affectionate, attentive, and deeply committed to his new life. But behind closed doors, the version of Battaglia that he had kept contained for years began to surface. The charm evaporated, replaced by unpredictability. Anger brewed beneath every disagreement. Michelle endured verbal attacks, belittling comments, and sudden explosions of temper that left her shaken. The abuse escalated slowly at first, raised voices, slammed doors, but soon transformed into physical violence. For 2 years, Michelle lived in fear, hoping each outburst would be the last. But one incident at their daughter's school made it clear that the situation had spiraled beyond control. Outside the building, in broad daylight, Battaglia attacked Michelle with such intensity that witnesses froze in shock. For Michelle, it was the breaking point. She filed charges against him, hoping the legal system would protect her. But Battaglia's reaction was more violent than she could have imagined. Learning about the complaint, he confronted her at a bus stop and beat her so severely she required hospitalization. Her nose was broken. Her face was swollen. The assault exposed the true danger she had been living with. Even then, Battaglia tried to downplay the attack, describing it as a minor scuffle, another glimpse of his manipulative personality. But the legal consequences followed. In 1987, he pleaded guilty to misdemeanor assault, receiving 2 years of probation. It became the first official record of a violent pattern that would haunt every relationship he entered. The pattern repeated after he remarried on April 6, 1991. His new wife, Mary Jean Pearl, initially saw the charming side of Battaglia that everyone else saw at first glance. He was attentive, funny, and affectionate. The early years seemed peaceful. The couple eventually had 2 daughters, 9-year-old Mary Faith and 6-year-old Liberty May. But as time passed, Battaglia's facade cracked again. The same tactics, insults, manipulation, intimidation, surfaced in the marriage. Mary Jean found herself shrinking emotionally under the weight of his constant verbal abuse. Yet there was one disturbing detail that defined their family dynamic. Battaglia never directed his violence toward his daughters. In fact, he seemed gentle and affectionate with them. He often told friends that his girls were the best part of his life. They trusted him completely. That contradiction became a chilling element of the tragedy that was to come up by January 1999. After 9 years of escalating emotional abuse, Mary Jean separated from him. But the violence didn't end. On Christmas Eve that same year, while visiting Faith and Liberty, Battaglia attacked Mary Jean in front of all 3 girls. Witnesses described how he punched her repeatedly, more than 20 times, and kicked her while she lay on the ground. The girls screamed and begged him to stop. The next day, Mary Jean filed for divorce and pressed charges once again. Battaglia pleaded guilty to another misdemeanor assault charge, receiving 2 more years of probation. But this time, a restraining order was added to the list of legal limitations. Battaglia ignored these restrictions almost immediately. His obsession with Mary Jean intensified. He left threatening messages, accused her of infidelity, and ranted about imagined betrayals. In April 2001, he called her repeatedly, unleashing verbal attacks. Mary Jean reported the harassment to his probation officer. On May 2, 2001, an arrest warrant was issued for violating probation conditions. Police notified him that he needed to turn himself in. But that same afternoon, he had a scheduled visit with Faith and Liberty that no one knew it would be the last time the girls would be seen alive. Battaglia picked up Faith and Liberty in a shopping center parking lot in Park Cities. Their relatives handed the girls over, unaware that hours earlier, he had been informed of the arrest warrant. The visit was meant to be routine. He was supposed to take them to dinner, talk to them, return them safely. Instead, he drove straight to his Dallas loft, a place the girls had been many times before, where they felt comfortable and loved by a father they believed would never hurt them. Meanwhile, Mary Jean was spending the afternoon at a friend's house. She had no reason to expect anything unusual, but when she arrived, she was told the girls wanted to speak with her. Worried, she called Battaglia's apartment. He answered and without warning put her on speaker. His voice was calm, almost too calm. As he held the phone to Faith in a soft, confused voice, Faith asked, "Mom, why do you want Daddy to go to jail?" Mary Jean froze. Her heart began to race. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. She tried to answer, but before she could speak, she heard Faith's terrified voice change. "No, Daddy, please don't. Don't do it." Gunshots exploded through the line. Mary Jean screamed, begging her daughters to run. More shots rang out, 7 in total. Then silence. Battaglia picked up the phone again. His voice was cold, mocking. "Merry Christmas." The reference was intentional. He was reminding her of the night he attacked her on Christmas Eve 2 years earlier. The cruelty was calculated. Inside the apartment, the scene was horrifying. Faith and Liberty had trusted their father enough to follow him inside without hesitation. They had been excited for dinner, unaware of the emotional storm brewing inside him. But in a violent eruption of rage and revenge, he forced them to participate in a cruel emotional game. He made them confront their mother on the phone. He wanted Mary Jean to hear their fear. He wanted the final act to be unforgettable. As the girls pleaded, Battaglia picked up a .357 Magnum Colt Python revolver. He loaded it deliberately. Faith turned and saw the gun pointed at them. She begged for her life. Liberty cried out. Moments later, both girls were shot multiple times. When Mary Jean heard the gunfire, she immediately dialed 911. Her voice was frantic, desperate, shattered. Police raced to the apartment, but it was too late. After the murders, Battaglia left his apartment and drove to a bar. He met his girlfriend as if nothing had happened. Then he visited a tattoo shop, where he had 2 red roses inked onto his arm, one for Faith, one for Liberty. The act was chilling, almost ritualistic. Hours later, during his arrest outside the tattoo shop, he resisted and ended up with a black eye. Officers described him as eerily calm. In interviews later, when asked how Faith and Liberty died, he answered flatly. They said they died of gunshot wounds. When pressed, he claimed he didn't remember the details. The lack of remorse became a defining part of the public's outrage. The capital murder trial began on April 22, 2002. The courtroom was filled with tension, anger, and disbelief. Prosecutors presented a timeline of years of domestic violence, manipulation, and psychological abuse. Michelle testified about the attacks during their marriage. Mary Jean recounted the Christmas Eve assault and the horrifying phone call during the murders. The jury listened to the audio recording of Battaglia's voicemail in which he spoke directly to his dead daughters, calling them brave girls and blaming their mother for everything. It took jurors just 19 minutes to convict him. During sentencing, the defense argued that Battaglia suffered from bipolar disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. Psychiatrists attempted to paint him as mentally unstable rather than evil. But the jury rejected the argument and sentenced him to death on April 30, 2002. For the next 16 years on death row, Battaglia remained defiant. He mocked the murders, calling his daughters legal daughters instead of biological ones to distance himself emotionally. He attempted multiple appeals, including a last-minute stay in 2016 regarding mental competency. But by 2017, his legal options had run out. On February 1, 2018, Battaglia arrived at the Huntsville Unit execution chamber. He ate his last meal, fried chicken, mashed potatoes with gravy, green beans, corn, and cornbread. He joked with guards. He smiled. He appeared almost excited about the attention. 9:18 p.m. Strapped to the gurney, he looked at the witnesses. When he saw Mary Jean, he smirked. "Well, hi, Mary Jean. I'll see y'all later. Bye." Then he turned to the guard and said, "Go ahead, please." As the lethal injection began, he lifted his head, laughed, and asked, "Am I still alive?" Seconds later, he whispered, "Oh, I feel it." Within moments, he was unconscious. He was pronounced dead at 9:40 p.m. Mary Jean watched quietly. When his chest stopped moving, she stepped away from the window. She whispered, "I've seen enough of him," before walking out. The case remains one of the most disturbing examples of how domestic violence, unchecked and underestimated, can escalate into unthinkable tragedy. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you believe the punishment John David Battaglia received was the only acceptable outcome, or should his claims about mental illness have mattered more? Some argue nothing could justify his actions. Others see deeper issues. Share your perspective in the comments.